Hello and welcome to Global Eye. I'm Parikshit Luthra. External Affairs Minister Jaishankar met U.S. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan and U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken in Washington, D.C. The meeting comes amid India's strained diplomatic ties with Canada. However, a Reuters report has suggested that U.S. State Secretary Blinken urged India to cooperate with the Canadian investigations. On the sidelines of the meeting, the two countries also agreed to continue their cooperation in defense, space and clean energy. The diplomats have also laid the groundwork for the upcoming 2+2 dialogue. In fact, speaking at the Hudson Institute a short while back, External Affairs Minister Jaishankar confirmed that he did raise the India-Canada issue with Secretary Blinken and NSA Jake Sullivan. He also said that India and Canada have had a lot of friction since the 1980s over Khalistani terrorism, and somehow the Canadian government has been very permissive of Khalistani elements, terror havens on its soil. He also said that he has conveyed to Canada, and the Indian government has conveyed to Canada, that if there is any information, it should be shared and India would be ready to act on it. Joining me now is Frank Wisner, former US Ambassador to India, Daniel Bordman, Senior Correspondent at the National Telegraph, and Michael Kugelman, Director at South Asia Institute at the Wilson Center. Ambassador Wisner, how do you see these statements coming from the External Affairs Minister Jaishankar, speaking in Washington just a short while back, confirming that yes, he did raise these issues, India-Canada tensions, with Secretary Blinken and also the NSA Jake Sullivan. They gave their side of the story, that this is something that goes back almost 30, 40 years, and Canada has always allowed Khalistani terrorism on its soil. So that is where we really come from, and there is no information that has come from the Canadian government on the Nijjar murder to India. How do you read these statements?
I read the statements pretty much as Jaishankar conveyed them, and that is India is making clear its point of view, its long-standing position on the dangers posed to Indian national security by the Khalistan movement, which has a strong presence in Canada and has acted in various nefarious ways over the decades. We now have the makings of a crisis, and I think it's in the interests of neither country, and certainly not of the United States, for this crisis to go on. It needs to be brought under control, and the way to do that is to begin, as Jaishankar pointed out in his meetings with Blinken and with Jake Sullivan, for the two sides to begin to exchange intelligence on each other's point of view, exchange information and points of view, and begin to lower the ceiling of tension and find a way to resolve the issue. Canada and India should be very strong partners. Canada owes a responsibility of controlling dissident activity, and India of resolving this issue. So I'm optimistic if we can keep the decibel levels down, that the matter can be managed and get off the front pages where publicity does it no good.
Right. Michael, let me get you in at this stage. We saw that you were at a meeting that Jaishankar had with U.S. congressmen, also U.S. think tanks. Was this question of India-Canada tensions, the recent murder of Hardeep Singh Nijjar, the Khalistani activist, did that come up during the conversation? Did Jaishankar reiterate the Indian government's point of view?
Right. Well, that I can't say because it was an off-the-record meeting. But I will say that, just sort of taking in how Jaishankar's visit in Washington has been so far, it's almost like on many levels that, this whole crisis with Canada didn't happen, in the sense that, Jaishankar's had a number of meetings around town, a number of engagements, both public and private, at which the issues that we've been hearing for many years and really over the last few months between the U.S. and India were the ones covered, tech cooperation, Indo-Pacific issues, and, talking about the next 2+2 dialogue. In many ways, it's like nothing happened, though, indeed, it's not a surprise to me, as I understand it, that Secretary Blinken has asked his Indian counterpart to cooperate with with Canada in the investigation of Niger's killing. That's the position that the U.S. has taken from the start. And what little public messaging we've heard from the Biden administration on this issue, that's been one of the core themes, is that India should cooperate with Canada on the investigation. And indeed, I imagine that in the private conversations that Jaishankar has had with interlocutors here, it's something that came up, though I assume that it would not have been a dominant feature of the conversations that he had with interlocutors in Washington.
All right, so you're saying that there were a very broad set of issues concerning the India-US relationship and the G20 that were discussed, and Canada was not the focus of the conversation. Let me get in Daniel Bordman right now. Daniel, how do you see this visit of the Indian External Affairs Minister to Washington, D.C., and Justin Trudeau, the Canadian Prime Minister's recent statements about India being a growing economic power, an important geopolitical player, and extremely important for everyone to engage constructively and seriously with the government of India, and how Canada is very serious about building ties? Does this somehow send a message that Canada does not want the long-term relationship with India to be hampered despite this incident?
I think that's exactly the message that's been sent. I read this as sometime in the last 3 days, some adults have entered the room and explained to Trudeau that you can't be starting a fight with your ally based on evidence that you can't release to the public if it's Five Eyes. So I think this is Trudeau sort of circling the wagons. He's been, I think, pushed off a position. I know there are a lot of, let's say, liberal cabinet ministers with ties to, some sort of far left or Khalistani ideology, which have been quite anti-India. So I think we've started to see some new voices enter the chat, and Trudeau sending this isn't going to escalate. I think he doesn't want the fight. We might scream about Niger some more a bit here or there, but I've noticed in Canadian media, I mean, when Canadian media is Khalistan TV on this issue for most part, but they've started to send reporters to India to prove their point and go through the Punjab region. And then once they start interviewing people in India, and especially the Punjab region, and they start saying, what are you doing? There is no Khalistan here. This is a purely Canadian problem. Their narrative has sort of fell flat in a way. So I think they've kind of come up against reality in a way. The Canadian people are still not aware that there are videos of Niger supporting suicide bombings and the like. So that's yet to fully hit Canadian mainstream. But when it does, I think they understand there's no way we're going to get the world on our side over the killing, even if the Indian government is involved, which we still have no proof that they are, or no proof that we can share. I think the adults have realized, even if there is this guy's on camera saying some pretty bad things, fomenting ethnic violence. And to circle back, this is the point. In Canada, this has been the problem for years and decades. It's been the tacit endorsement of extremism. On this issue, Khalistanis, who've been allowed to, I mean, they're the worst terrorists in Canadian history. They blew up the Air India bombing, and they've attempted to assassinate Indian ministers on Canadian soil. And the attempted assassins who are convicted in Canadian court, they get invited to India by the Prime Minister of Canada. Like, it's insane. And that's what's been driving this divide for 40 years. So I hope that the Trudeau government has decided to de-escalate this one, step down off the ledge. Maybe we'll have some nebulously worded statements coming from both sides. We'll write a letter to the UN, and then we'll all move on with this so we can all declare victory and go home. That's what I hope. But in my view, this problem doesn't go away until Canada deals with the Khalistani issue in a serious way. And I don't see that happening under the leadership of Justin Trudeau and Jagmeet Singh.
All right. Clearly, there are domestic politics at play in Canada. But Ambassador Wisner, just to understand from you a bit about how the Five Eyes work, when it comes to intelligence shared within the Five Eyes partners, and this is what the Canadian government had said, that the information on this killing of Niger, this murder, the context came from the Five Eyes partner, but the smoking gun was from Canada. Considering the Five Eyes were involved, can one of the Five Eyes member share that evidence openly, and can they share it with a country which is not a member of NATO, not a member of the Five Eyes?
I doubt it. The point of having the Five Eyes is to have a confidential channel for the exchange of the most sensitive intelligence that exists and is available to the member governments. It's not for public commentary, not for public dissemination. So there will be no comment on the details of what has been discussed inside the Five Eyes publicly, not by any of the participating governments, including Canada. The resolution of this problem lies literally and singly between Ottawa and New Delhi. And that's where the de-escalation that's occurring needs to be continued. The two sides have to speak frankly to one another, exchange what evidence they have, not look to any outside third party to resolve the outstanding questions.
Right. On that note, we're going to take a short break, but Dan Bordman, Frank Wisner, Michael Kugelman, we're just taking a break. We'll be right back in just a minute. All right, welcome back. We are discussing India-Canada tensions, and we have reported how the External Affairs Minister Subramaniam Jaishankar, speaking at the Tussle Institute, did confirm raising the India-Canada tensions with his U.S. counterpart Antony Blinken and also the U.S. NSA Jake Sullivan, explaining that there is a long history of friction between India and Canada over Khalistani terrorism, and Canada has not acted on India's request to take action against several Khalistani terrorists. More than 20 or 25 requests of extradition have gone to the Canadian government over the years. But let me go across again to Frank Wisner, Michael Kugelman, and Dan Bordman. Michael, beginning with you, how do you see this visit of the External Affairs Minister to Washington, meeting key members of the U.S. government in terms of reducing temperatures, reducing tensions between India and Canada? It won't happen overnight, but do you see it paving the way in some sort of fashion?
Well, I do think that there might be a role for the Biden administration to play as some type of mediator in the sense of trying to quietly, privately pressing both capitals, Ottawa and New Delhi, to at the least ensure that they don't take any new further escalatory steps. I mean, the U.S. government clearly has a very strong interest in this crisis winding down as soon as possible. Now, I understand that India may not welcome a third-party intervention, so to speak, and that it tends to prefer that there not be third-party interventions in its diplomatic crises. But I do think that there might be a role that the U.S. can play in that regard, and perhaps that was part of the conversations that Jaishankar had with Blinken and perhaps others. You might have heard that message from the U.S. side to try to gently impress this idea upon Jaishankar that it doesn't serve anyone's interest to escalate anymore. And I will say that there have not been any new escalations, so far as I know, in this crisis over the last day or two. But I think that again, to the extent that Jaishankar spoke about the Canada issue with his U.S. interlocutors, probably was not a very happy, easy conversation. But I don't think that was the dominant feature of any of the conversations that he would have had here in Washington.
All right. Let me also go back to Daniel Bordman. Daniel, I'd like to ask you about what the External Affairs Minister said when asked about whether the Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau raised these allegations on Nijjar's murder with the Prime Minister during the G20. Jaishankar said, I've already answered it, and his earlier statement was that Canada has raised these allegations both privately and publicly. Why do you think, and what prompted Trudeau to go public with these allegations?
I can't imagine the decision-making process to do this. The only thing that the excuse I would accept from Justin Trudeau as to why he would do something so crazy like this was he was pushed by the Five Eyes themselves, and the Americans and their allies said, okay, there's something real here. you actually have to do it. But but why would we do that without being able to put the evidence forward? Like, again, no one wants the intelligence to know, like, were we spying on India? How did we spy on India? Did the Americans spy on India? Can they hack certain messaging apps that we think are secure? Like, none of this we want to bring into the public, because, like, if we have a method to track, let's say nefarious actors, we don't want to waste that public knowledge on an ally. So that's insane. So I don't know why Trudeau would do it at the time he did. Someone had to tell him that was a bad idea. I mean, the optics look terrible. This is right after his embarrassing India trip himself, so it looks spiteful. And it just looks like he's doing it in a way that is spiteful. And in international relations, a lot of time what's more important than the truth is how things are perceived. Can something be true? And the way Trudeau has conducted himself, he's kind of conducting himself in a way that indicates that he's probably bluffing, to say the least. So why would he do it the time he did it? There is no logical explanation. I don't think there's a good explanation. If it came from Canada, you would at least wait a few months, wait for an investigation to be concluded. I cannot fathom the decision-making process to do this. And I think that's why I'm on Indian TV right now, because I saw them do this and I went ballistic and said, why are they doing this? This makes no sense. So I still have not been able to divinate the motivations of Justin Trudeau. And I've been trying for about 8 years, and I find it best to just try not to think like him or think his thoughts, because you'll go insane. So Justin Trudeau's done something crazy. He then later the week did something even crazier, and that's what Canada's talking about. How do they invite a Nazi into Parliament? So this is the cycle of Justin Trudeau. He does something. Why does he do this? We all freak out. There's a media frenzy. He does something else that's incredibly crazy. We go on to the next thing, and so on and so forth until 2025.
Okay. All right. All right. Ambassador Wisner, coming back to you. Again, I found this a little interesting in terms of the tone and the body language. When at the Hudson Institute, he was asked about these allegations made by Canada. Jaishankar took a jibe and laughed and said, for Canada, the US is the global south. But on a more serious note, the fact that someone in the Five Eyes was spying on India. Yes, countries do spy on each other. Even friendly countries do at times. But the fact that somebody in the Five Eyes was monitoring Indian diplomats very, very closely, the communications were being monitored. How does this, in the short run, impact relations between India, Canada, and the United States?
Who are you directing that question to?
Ambassador, to you,
Hello?
Ambassador Wisner.
Is that question directed to me?
Correct.
Assuming you can hear me. I'm afraid that I take issue with what Mr. Bordman said. I have a great deal more respect for the Canadian government and its processes. I suspect the Prime Minister's decision to go public was also driven by the fact that the issue had been raised and had moved sufficiently between Canada and India among many agencies of the Canadian government, and that the Prime Minister faced a serious risk of it going public. And rather than have it go public in an uncontrolled manner, he made the matter public himself to control the media reaction and the diplomatic action that followed. So I tend to think it's less a knee-jerk than a calculated move to control a dangerous situation.
But Ambassador Wisner, just one quick question which I was trying to put to you is that the fact that someone in the Five Eyes was spying on Indian diplomats, monitoring Indian diplomats, how does that impact relations between India, United States and Canada in the short term?
We don't know enough about the case and the facts. And if those are going to come out, they'll come out in due course. But to say that we know that there was direct intelligence operations directed against the Indian government is to take what we know today too far. We don't know. Could there have been electronic intercepts of communications between private parties, public parties? I have no idea, and I don't think anybody does. So let's not jump to conclusions. The fact is, the Jaishankar visit here was one more step in a major undertaking between the United States and India. The relationship has now moved with the Prime Minister's visit here, with Biden's visit to India, Biden's the American government's agreements on a broad range of issues with India, the work done inside the Global South. There is a huge agenda, and it's that agenda that was the focus of the Jaishankar visit to Washington. The Canada matter, while serious, was not the centerpiece and not the most important work that had to be done. It would have been, as I think this conversation reveals, something handled on the side, and it needs to be handled on the side between New Delhi and Ottawa and taken out of the public debate.
All right, we've run out of time, but that's what Michael Kugelman also said, that this was about broadening Indo-US ties, speeding up the momentum between the two countries, and also about G20 deliverables. Thank you once again, Michael Kugelman, Ambassador Wisner, Daniel Bordman, for joining us here on Global Eye. With that, it's a wrap on this edition of the show. Thank you for watching. Goodbye.